Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the pre-Pesach. First of, I think, 3 or 4 pre-Pesach editions of Daf Yomi. Right, we've got, schedule for this week is morning today. Right now, 8 o'clock, you've already missed it if you're at home. And then we're going to do tomorrow regular time, and Tuesday, we're going to do regular time, and Monday, right? No, Tuesday is?
Chametz.
Is B'dikas Chametz. So we're looking at, we're looking at an early one. Stay tuned. We think 7 to 8, but stay tuned. We've got to check with wives and make sure that everything is good. And then Wednesday morning before the davening.
7 a.m.
7 a.m. to 8 a.m. and then davening 8 a.m.
Yes.
So with a siyum on Maseches Chagiga.
Is that what Rabbi
I think so. I think that's what I heard what Rabbi Jax was doing, or if it's not, is Rabbi Gissel's doing?
Gisselson.
Now it's Rabbi Gisselson. So we'll talk through and see what we can.
There's a change in
change
the
it.
schedule.
But there will be a siyum. So if you are firstborn, that's good for you.
Yeah.
But keep an eye on the chat. We are sponsored by Jeff and Chava Bela Wald this month. Lili Nishmas, Jeff's father, Mr. Roman Wald, Avram Ben Shmuel Zichron Avracha, and grandfather, Mr. Menachem Eisner. Menachem Mendel Ben Mordechai Zichron Avracha was Yortzei's were in Rosh Chodesh Nisan. May the Neshamas have an Aliyah. Daf Yomi for the month, Shmuli and Miriam Fuchs. Lili Nishmas, Shmuli's mother, Bela Yenta Bas Chuna Zichron Avracha, whose Yortzeit is on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. May her Neshama have an Aliyah. And now we get into, with a long introduction, we get into our learning, which is 18 lines from the top of the page on Ayin Hey, Amud Aleph. Hachalos Tu'unos Belila Urakikan Mashicha. We were discussing first when we add the oil. We talked about adding the oil at various points during the Korban. We talked about the argument between the Chachamim and Rabbi about whether we're going to add the oil before baking or after baking. Rabbi seemed to want to add the oil after the baking, and the Chachamim said no, we'll add it while it's still before the baking. And then we are now going to talk about adding the oil differently to the ma'afet tanur, to the oven-baked offerings. So these are chalos that are baked first, where afterwards the Torah tells us that they're going to be chalos belulos b'shemen and rakikin that are meshucha b'shemen. That's actually written a few times in the Torah. So let's talk about that. Tanur Rabbanan, our rabbis learned. Chalos belulos velo rakikin belulos. When you make the chalos, use ma'afet tanur. These are 2 items that are baked. One is baked in a thicker loaf. One is baked as a wafer, almost like our matzahs. But one was the chalos, which were baked as a loaf, are broken up and they are then mixed in with the oil. And the rakikin, velo rakikin belulin, but not the flat ones. The flat ones do not get mixed in oil in the same way. Yachol, you might have thought v'halodinhu that it would be a kal v'chomer, because chalos ein tunas meshicha. Chalos don't require meshicha. Meshicha, we're going to see, is the process of putting oil on the top of the finished loaf, and so we don't do that by chalos. But ti'unas belila, but the pasuk says nevertheless you have to mix oil in. So rikikin shetuna meshicha, the rikikin which do require that adding of the oil on the top, enodin shetunim belila, for sure they should require mixing of the oil. Talmud lomar chalos belulos, it tells us in the Torah that chalos require the mixing of the oil, but velo rikikin, but not the rikikin. And we'll do the other way around as well. Rikikin meshuchin, the rikikin require meshicha. That's the literally anointing. That's to spread some oil on the top. Velo chalos meshuchos, the chalos do not. Chalos get belula. Yachol v'halodinhu. We might have thought there's a kal v'chomer to learn there. Umar kikin she'enan tunin belila. If the wafers do not require us to mix oil in, but tunin meshicha, but they require anointing of the oil, then I might have thought chalos tunin belila, that the chalos, which would be more strict in that they do require you to mix the oil in, shetuna meshicha. For sure, they should require meshicha and the oil to be anointed on top of it. Talmud lomar. Therefore, the pasuk says rekikin meshuchim, that the rekikin, the wafers, are the ones that get the anointed of the oil. Velo chalos meshuchos, but not the chalos. So my Talmuda. So I mean, the psukim do say that the chalos get belulos, and the rekikin do get meshicha. But is that to the exclusion of the other necessarily? So Amar Rava says, Lo lishtamit v'lichtov chalos meshuchos rikikin belulin. The Torah writes several times. There's several places the Torah says chalos belulos b'shemen. Might sound familiar because we've seen it in a few times. And rikikin meshuchim b'shemen. Never once does it flip it. Never once does it go the other way around. If the Torah wanted to tell us that one was at least there's a kal v'chomer, you could learn one from the other, all the Torah would have had to do is flip it one time. The fact that it doesn't indicates that that is not, in fact, the case, and that belulos is specifically berchala, mixing it in, and putting it on the top, smearing on the top is something you specifically do by the rekikin. Okay, so now, Ketzad, Moshchan, Kimin Ki, Vashar Necha. We said, how are you supposed to put the oil on the rekikin? You're supposed to make it like a Greek letter ki, and the rest of it is consumed. So my Kimin Ki, what is a ki? Amarav Kahana, Kimin Ki, Yavani, it's the Greek letter ki, which we described as the letter tes, potentially the letter chaf, potentially the letter x, potentially any number of mefarshim that explain what it is.
Switch up for you until you pronounce it correctly?
Yes, until you could pronounce it. You said chai, right? It's pronounced the kai, right?
Yeah.
This is ki here, okay.
I checked on Google and then YouTube.
Hey, Google cannot be wrong. If there's anything we've ever learned in life. Taner Abanan, our rabbis learned. Mincha haba, mechza chalus and mechza rekikin. If you've got a mincha, it says the brisa, that half is brought with chalos and half is brought with rekikin. Mevi log shemen. So then we're going to bring a log of oil and vechotzehu, and then you're going to split that log in half. Now this is according to Rabbi Shimon's opinion, who said that you can bring half a ma'afet tanur as chalos and half as rekikin. We had suggested that you couldn't do that. If you were going to bring ma'afet tanur, you had to bring all 10 in one and all 10 in the or all the other. But if you hold like Rabbi Shimon, who said in the Mishnah on Samach Gimel that you could bring half and half, so then you're going to take all the oil, you're going to split it in half. You're going to take half of them for the chalos and half of them for the rekikin, because the application of the oil is going to be different between them. The chalos bololon, and then you're going to mix the oil together with the chalos, urekikin moshchan, and then you're going to smear the oil on the top of the rekikin. Mosheach es harakik al pnei kulo, you're going to smear on the top of the wafer on all of it, or at least we said as the shape of the key, like we said. Ushara shemen, what do you do with the leftover oil after you smear? Machzira lachalos. Then go back and pour that into the chalos. Why not? You're going to pour the whole thing into the chalos. You mix that all up. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon that no, Moshchan kimin ki, you anoint it with the letter ki, ushara shemen necha lekohanim, and whatever you have left over, that gets given to the kohanim, like you would by the other rekikin, right? So why use up the rest of the oil to mix it in when you already used half of it to mix in with the half that were bolos? Then you just take the rest and you give that to the kohen. Tanya idach, we have another brisa. Rekikin haboin bifnei atzman. If you've got rekikin, if you've got wafers that are coming by themselves, right? If a person promises to bring a ma'afet tanur offering and all he's going to bring is 10 rekikin, mevi lug shemen umoshchan, then what you do is you bring the lug of oil that comes with it, and you're going to anoint that on top of the rekikin. The choser umoshchan ad sheyichle kol shemen shebalug. And then you just keep doing that over and over and over and over again until you run out of oil. Right, this way you use up all the oil. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, the name of Rabbi Shimon. No, Moshchan kimin ki. You put an anointment like a ki letter, Ushar Shimon nechal lekohanim, and the rest goes to the kohanim. You don't have to keep going over and over and over. A look at Shimon is enough that you're like, if a revius is what, about 3 ounces, or so you're talking about 12 ounces of oil to keep going over and over and over, 12 ounces of oil to keep anointing it. Give it to the kohen. Next Mishnah. Kol ha-menachos hanasos bekli tu'unos pesitza. Whenever you make a mincha in a utensil, so then you have to break it up before you are going to take a kmitza from it. Right. So that's
one of the shortest mishnahs I've ever seen here.
Yeah, it's pretty quick, right?
Wow. Yeah.
You might want to write this down, right? That's a 6-word mishnah to see if it might be our shortest. I don't know whether the mishnayos sometimes get divided up differently in the actual mishnayos. I wonder if it's the same division. But yeah, for a Gemara, right? 6-word mishnah.
Good trivia right there.
Yep. So there you go. 6-word mishnah. So now, the issue here is going to be, we've got this something called a minchas, we've got minchas marcheshes and the minchas machvas. Those menachos are made in a utensil, and then we're going to take the scoop of those for sure we're talking about here, that you have to, once you've fried them up, then you're going to break them up, and then that's for sure that we need that. Ones that don't require pesisas, we're going to see which ones we're going to exclude. We're going to exclude in the moment, the Gemara is going to say, the shtei halechem, the 2 loaves of bread, those aren't made in a utensil, those are brought as loaves. Right. And also the lechem hapanim is also not. So those are not broken up. So the question that comes in is, what about the minchas soles? The minchas soles is made in a utensil. Rashi seems to imply here that we're including the minchas soles, right? That mincha, sorry, I take that back. Rashi seems to say that the mincha, that we're only talking about a mincha, which is you only need the loaves to be broken down if the kmitza is done after you bake it. Meaning you've got a loaf, right? So now you obviously have to do kmitza on a loaf. How do you do kmitza on a loaf? You break it into pieces. Then I can do kmitza on my loaf. Whereas if I have a mincha soles, which was fine flour, and I did the kmitza before I baked it, there's no need to do psisa, which is to bake it and then break it up and again afterwards. I wouldn't need to. That's a machlokas rishonim. It's not clear because this Mishnah seems to imply anything that was sanctified in a utensil would require psisa, would require to be broken up. Why would the soles not be included in that? Rashi has the logical reason is because there's no need to break it up if you're not doing kmitza on it. But that's subject to some disagreement. What is clear is what the Gemara is about to say. L'mu'utei mai, what is the Mishnah clearly excluding? Amar of Papa says, "L'mutei shtei halechem v'lechem apanim." The shtei halechem and the lechem apanim are not broken up, right? They are placed whole. They're in their korban. Tana Rabban and the rabbis learned. Pasos osa pitim. The pasuk says pasos osa pitim, that you're supposed to break it into pieces. The pasuk continues v'yatzakta l'Hashem, and then you pour oil on it. It's a mincha. It's a mincha. So l'rabos kol mincha lepsisa. That tells us that all menachos need to be broken up into pieces. Yachol shani mar be'af shtei halechem v'lechem apanim. I might thought the shtei halechem and the lechem apanim are also mincha offerings, despite the fact that we are questioning whether, in fact, we would call some of these mincha offerings. We had that conversation whether the lechem apanim were mincha, whatever, as we had discussed in the past. But generally speaking, we refer to it as a mincha offering, as it is a grain offering, and it's offered as a korban. Tamalomar, the pasuk says osa. Osa comes to exclude something. It's going to exclude those. It makes more sense to exclude those because there's no kmitza on them, and so therefore they're not going to be broken up. Then the pasuk says, "V'yatzakta shemen mincha." You're going to pour oil on this mincha. L'rabos kol menachos leyitzika. So this tells me that I'm supposed to pour oil on all of my mincha offerings. Yachol shani mar be'af minchas ma'afeh. I might think that this is also coming to include also the ones that are baked in an oven. But Tamalomar, the pasuk says, Aleha shemen. You're supposed to pour oil on it. On it means to exclude something else. Otzias achalos velo otzias arakikin. I might say, well, I'm going to exclude one of the two. Maybe I'll exclude the chalos, but not the rakikin. Maybe I still have to pour oil on the rakikin. Talmud lomar he. Then the pasuk says he as well, mincha he. So now I've got two exclusions. I'm going to exclude chalos and I'm going to exclude the rakikin, both of the oven-baked offerings, so I don't do that last oil pouring. So therefore, what we know now is that when I make my oven-baked offerings, I'm going to pour a little oil into the container. That was the beginning oil. Mix it up, bake it, break it up, pour more oil on, but I don't have a third oil pouring on top of the baked offerings. My Talmudah. So, what kind of learning? What kind of teaching is this? That this exclusion applies to the oven baked offerings rather than ema lahotzi minchas kohanim. There are other offerings that I could exclude as well. What about the mincha that a kohen brings? Why don't we say that the mincha that a kohen brings doesn't get oil poured on it at the end because it's a little bit different from the. Because it's also not listed in Parak Beis of all the menachos that are listed there. It's listed in Parak Vav in a separate location. Maybe that's the one that doesn't get oil poured on it. So the answer is Amar Rabba. Rabba says Ezu davar shetzarich shnei miyutin. There's two exclusions here, right? There's an aleha and a he. Well, if it's the minchas kohen, that's only one thing to exclude. Why would I exclude two? So therefore, I need to exclude something that needs two exclusions. Haviyomer minchas ma'afeh. That makes sense. The minchas ma'afeh has chalos and has rikikin, has two things to exclude. So therefore, it's just like a puzzle. It matches the empty piece here, right? So if I'm going to exclude something, I'm going to exclude the mafeh that I'm not going to pour on top, rather than the minchas kohen. Okay, good. Next Mishnah. Minchas Yisrael, if I've got a mincha from a regular Jewish person, so kofel echad l'shnaim u'shnaim l'arba. Here's what you do. You take the loaf of bread. This is how you break it up. You take it, you fold it in half. Then you fold it into quarters, okay? Umavdil, and then you rip those quarters, you rip it into quarters. Minchas Kohanim, the mincha of the Kohanim, kofel echad l'shnaim u'shnaim l'arba. The mincha of Kohanim, you fold it in half, and then 2 to 4, ve'enu mavdil, but you don't rip it up, because there's no kmitza in it, according to most opinions, right? So there's no kmitza, there's no need to break it up. Minchas Kohen Mashiach lo haya mikapla. The mincha of the Kohen Mashiach, the Kohen Gadol's offering, so they didn't even fold that one up at all. So there's a folding of that one. So you're imagining the bread we're talking about is like a laffa kind of a thing, right?
Right,
That's
right.
thinking of it. It's easily foldable, right? That's my imagination.
Or a
Thinking,
wrap,
right?
or a
That's
wrap.
or a wrap or something like that, right? Rabbi Shimon says, because he's going to require a kmitza on all the offerings. Remember, Rabbi Shimon says that even if you're not going to eat it, you're nevertheless going to do a kmitza and then burn the rest of it. So he needs to break it up. Rabbi Shimon minchas kohanim ve'minchas kohen Mashiach ein bahem pesisa mipnei shem bahem kmitza. So he says, Rabbi Shimon says, those do not. He says, there's no. You don't break. There's no. The Tanakama says that as far as the minchas kohanim, you're not going to break that up at all because there's no psisa when there's no kmitza, and since these menachos are burned completely on the mizbeach, there's no kmitza on it. There's no breaking them up. Kol she'ein behem kmitza, ein behem psisa. If you're not going to burn them on the mizbeach, you don't break them up at all. The kulon poses in kizesim. Now, this question is whether this is a statement that goes. This is whether this is Rabbi Shimon is continuing to argue that Rabbi Shimon is arguing and saying that the Tanakama holds they rip it into quarters, and now Rabbi Shimon is saying no, we're going to break them up into smaller kizesim sizes. Or there's another explanation that potentially that this is according to everybody that says that even if you rip it into quarters, you have to be careful not to rip any pieces smaller than a kazayas. You have to make sure that they stay in kizesim. But let's say at least, simply speaking, that this is Rabbi Shimon's arguing on the Tanakama. The Tanakama says you're going to rip into quarters, and Rabbi Shimon says, nope, we're going to break it into smaller pieces, right? You're going to break it into pieces in order to make it into a shear of a kazayas. Okay. Tana Rabbanan and Rabbi learned. Pasos, right? You're supposed to break, the pasuk in Vayikra says that you're supposed to break into pieces. It says pasos osa pitim. You're going to break the pieces. Yachol l'shnayim. It says pasos. So might break it into two. Talmud lomar pitim. Therefore, it says a second time pitim. You take the pieces and break the pieces into pieces. So eat pitim. Well, pitim is plural. Yachol yasa pirurin. You might think to break it into a bunch of crumbles, into all kinds of pieces. Talmud lomar. Therefore, the pasuk says osa. You're just going to take the one you broke in half and break that into pieces. You break what you broke in half into pieces, not breaking that further into pieces. So it's just half and quarters. That's it. How do you do it? Minchas Yisrael. When you take a mincha of Yisrael, kofel echad l'shnaim. You break it into half. Ushnaim la'arba, and then half into quarters. Umavdil, and you break it up, and that's it. Then the Gemara continues on minchas kohanim. By contrast, the kohen's mincha. So we said that you're supposed to kofel echad l'shnaim. You fold it in half, ushnaim l'arba, and you fold the half into fourths. Ve'enu mavdi, but you don't separate it. Haya mekapfla, etc. V'ha'anantnan. So now the Gemara says, but we have in a brisa that the Kohen Mashiach one was not folded. We have a Mishnah. So this brisa says the Kohen Mashiach mekapla, Kohen Mashiach haya mekapla, that the Kohen Mashiach's offering we would fold, and our Mishnah says you don't fold it. So which is it? So Marabba, it's not an argument. It's not two different opinions here. Eina mekapla la'arba. When it says you don't fold it, it means you don't fold it into quarters. Aval mekapla b'shnayim, but you do fold it in half. So the Kohen Gadol's offering you fold it in half. That's it, but you don't fold it into quarters. That's why our Mishnah says you don't fold it. Just means you don't fold it like the other ones. And the Bryce says you do fold it because you fold it in half. Then Rabbi Shimon comes along and says minchas kohanim and minchas kohen Mashiach ein bahen psisa. Rabbi Shimon says that the minchas kohanim and the minchas kohen Mashiach do not get broken into pieces because there's no kmitza on them, so therefore they don't get broken into pieces. Amar Rav Yosef says chai chavitza. This chavitza, get into a complicated brachos shaila. Chavitza is a food that was made of broken up pieces of bread. We'll go with Rashi's explanation.
Croutons, for example.
It's like croutons kind of a thing. Rashi's explanation is that it was bread that was broken up and then put into a stew or whatever and cooked again into that stew. So the bread is broken up and then recooked. Okay? So now, de'izbe perur and kazayas. The amount of pieces, right, when each of the chunks, as you say, it's like croutons, each of the chunks has a kazayas to it, mivarchin aleha motzi lechem in arts. The bracha remains hamotzi because you're holding a kazayas. You've got a kazayas of bread. It retains its shape and appearance as bread. So therefore, the bracha is still hamotzi, despite the fact that you put the bread into the cooked item.
Just like if you eat 10 croutons. If you eat 10 croutons, it could be a...
It could be a hamotzi aval but ileis be perur and kazayas. If the pieces that you break up are not a kazayas, Mevarchinon alei borei mine mizonos, then the bracha becomes borei mine mizonos. I asked a shaila because I've got these bagel chips that you see people sell, right? In the supermarket, it's the greatest boobies. So I'm telling you, this is great. You got your day-old leftover bagels, right? They take their bagels, their hamotzi, and they chop them up, they slice them into pieces and fry them. What bracha do you make on them? So I had asked Rabbi Kohanan, who was nearby, I said, Rabbi Kohanan, what bracha do you think you make on these? He says, they're mizonos. Why? Because they're not a kazayas. Since they're chopped up into bagel chips or chopped up into pieces less than a kazayas, they become mizonos because they're recooked afterwards, so they become mizonos. So otherwise, it was one to make bagel chips, pita chips, right? You see the containers, the pita chips. This is where this halacha becomes a very practical shaila. I'm like,
they're very things like that. They have unique shapes.
That's but the key is that if they're smaller than each piece is smaller than a kazayas, then and they're refried, according to Rashi, right? They're cooked again, then their bracha changes. If I take a pizza and I break it into small pieces, bracha changes? No, but if I recook it again, now is it refried or I recook it again? So then the bracha now becomes a mizonos.
So Rabbi Kohanan who goes according to Rashi here.
Rabbi Kohanan, he goes according to halacha.
It doesn't combine?
It does not seem to combine. So if I have a bag of pita chips, it's a mizonos. Right? Now, if I'm eating that as a meal, then you have a different issue of taking a mizonos and whether a mizonos combines together in order to make hamotzi. But generally speaking, if I have the snack bag or if I take the pita chips and I'm scooping my herring up with my bagel chips, then that's a snack rather than it is a full meal. Right. Okay. So Amar Rav, this is our halacha corner, right? Again, you're going through Menachos. Who would have thought?
Gem.
Right? Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Mina Amin Allah. Where do I know this from? The Tanya, we learn in a brisa. Haya omed umakriv menachos b'Yerushalayim. Now, this who is standing and bringing menachos b'Yerushalayim. Let's say it's simple. Let's say it's a kohen. It could be the person who's bringing the offering. Omer baruch shechianu v'kimanu. You have to say a shechianu. So this is a question. Who is it? Is it the kohen or the person who's bringing it? The kohen says a shechianu. We learn an important lesson from here. The kohen has, how often does a kohen bring the korban? Right? He brings a korban from time to time. He's showing up in the base of Mikdash. He's working one day every half a year or so. So this is where we know the halacha is that if you have not performed a mitzvah in a long period of time, almost a year or so, then you say shechianu when you perform that mitzvah again. Hence even if there's a mitzvah that you have a set time to bring it, like let's say lulav or something like that, so you say shechianu when you perform that mitzvah. But even if the mitzvah doesn't have a set time, like this bringing the korban, it doesn't have a specific set moment. If you have not done this mitzvah for some time, you could say a shechianu if you have not done it for a long period of time. Another practical halacha, right? But there is a set time, right? Our wives would say shechianu when they light Shabbos candles, right? But that's not Shabbos candles, but Yom Tov candles. Okay. Fine. Natlon le'achlon. Now, if he takes it to go, he's going to eat his korban mincha now. Omer hamotzi lechem min haaretz. He's going to make a bracha of hamotzi on his right. Interesting, bracha is missing, right? There's no bracha on eating the actual korban. Right? Is it not a mitzvah to eat the actual korban, or we leave it out? We talked about before when we were eating the korban of the zvachim that we said there was a bracha. So I know that there could be.
Was shako,
well, the shako on the meat, but we had a bracha al shir kedushanim mitzvah sovet zivanu, right? Al chilas zvachim or whatever we had. Remember, we had the discussion over there, or it was making on the zevach. Question is whether there's a separate bracha on eating the korban or not. So okay, we leave that aside for a moment, but we're at least making hamotzi on the bread. Utnan, and we learn in the Mishnah, v'chulon pesisim bekazayas. The Mishnah says, why do you make hamotzi? Because all the pieces that you broke up were all a kazayas. So therefore, that's our proof, right? You need to break them into a kazayas. That's why you make hamotzi. Amar le Abaye. Abaye says to Rav Yosef, ulatana debei Rabbi Yishmael. But what about, according to the Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, da'amar mefarchon ad shemachzirin l'saltan. In Rabbi Yishmael has a brisa that says, no, you don't break it into quarters, not kazayas. Crumbs, we want breadcrumbs. Crumble it all the way down until it becomes crumbs like solas again. So hachinami de lo mavarech hamotzi, does he say, is according to the Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, we're not making hamotzi on it anymore? V'chitem hachinami, before you say, no, you're right, we don't. V'atanya, we learn in a brisa, likit mikula and kazayas, if you gather all the crumbs together, and you mix them together and you make a kazayis, v'achlo, and you eat it on Pesach, because why not? Pesach just keeps coming up. Im chametzu, if it's breadcrumbs that are chametz, anush kares, you get kares for eating chametz on Pesach. V'matzahu, if you take matzah meal, let's say I've got no matzah. So I take a bunch of matzah meal and I smush it all together to make matzah, make a kazayis of matzah meal. Adam yotze behen yedei chovasu b'Pesach. You can be yotze on that for Pesach, right? And it winds up being practical for people who have digestion issues or people who can't chew. Can I grind up my matzah and be yotze eating my matzah ground up? And the answer here is yeah, it's still on motzi, and it's still the halachic eating of matzah, despite the fact that it's pre-ground up, no problem. So hachabamayaskin, what's going on here? Beshe'erson. You've got to mix them together into some kind of dough or something to mix it up together, right? In order to be able to combine. They can't be crumbs separated. So it seems like if I, some binding, get some water in it or something in order to make it into something that mushes it together, then it mushes into a kazayas, then I can eat it again. Ihachi, if that's true, the Bryce is discussing that I'm going to make hamotzi when I've got it mixed together as a kazayas. Hainu diktani Allah. That's what the Bryce says. V'husha achlan bichdei achilas pras. It says that you have to eat it in the time it takes to eat a slice. So, bless you.
Thank you.
So what happens is, it's a process, a half a loaf. And they would eat a half a loaf was the normal amount of bread that you would eat together with a meal. Halachically speaking, 3 to 9 minutes. That's the amount of time that we're supposed to eat our matzah in, right? Somewhere between 3 and 9 minutes. Now, ve'i b'she'erson. So now, if you're mixing them together, why does it say shu achlon? He ate them, plural. Bichdei achilas pras. If he mixed it together, she'achlo mibayli. He ate it, his mush together ball of mush. So Ella. So rather, hachamaiskin. What's going on here? What has to happen is the original piece, this is what makes a difference. If I took a matzah and I ground it up right here in front of me, now it retains its bracha of hamotzi.
You have multiple pieces.
If I've got a box of matzah meal, it seems, and I mush it together, that's not hamotzi. It's mezonos.
Far pure matzah meal.
So therefore, like what's the bracha on all of our cookies that we're adding all the matzah meal into? Mizonos, right? That's clearly where we're going to see, right? It's good that we learned this before Pesach, so we make sure that we know this, right? Mizonos on our matzah meal, and if you don't eat any matzah meal, right? Gebrachs, watch yourself. Okay,
Unless it's homemade matzah meal and you made it.
Unless you homemade matzah meal, and then you can make a motzi on it, right? And then, right? My havi Allah. So, what is the conclusion to all of this? Rav Sheshes Amar Rav Yisha says, "Afilu perurin she'ein bayin kazayis." Even if you've got pieces that are not a kazayas, right, and you've got the original piece that you brought it from, right, you're still going to make hamotzi on it. Amar Rabba v'hu de'ika torisa denahama alayhu. That is when it looks like bread, right? If you've got a piece, you rip off a little piece of the bread, it still looks like bread. You're going to make hamotzi on that little piece, even if it doesn't have a kazayas, right? But if it doesn't look like bread anymore, you grind it up into crumbs, right? So then it's going to be, you're not going to make hamotzi on it. Next Mishnah. It's great. I love days like this, right? Mishnah. Kol ha-menachos tu'unos shalosh me'os shifa. Right? When you're going to make your mincha, so you gotta smush it 300 times. The chamesh me'os be'it, and you got to punch it 500 times. Right? That's how you knead the dough. Right? You got to really be mixed together well. Machlokas. Are we talking about before, when it's in the kernel stage, and what you're doing here is you're smashing it so you can remove the chaff very easily? Or are we talking about once it's made into dough and you're kneading it so the dough is very smooth? Question, not clear. But either way, we're kneading it 300 times, we're punching it 500 times. Shiva ba'ita b'chitin. Here's what you do, right? The kneading and the punching, you do it by wheat. Rabbi Yossi, so when it's still wheat, but Rabbi Yossi Omer Babatzek, we're talking about once it's dough. Kol menachos bos eser. When you bring a mincha, all of the loaves that we talk about come in groups of 10, right? Always 10 loaves. When you bring a korban toda, every type of loaf, 10 of them. And when you're going to bring your nazir mincha that comes with the nazir offering, it's going to be 2 loaves, 2 groups of 10. Chutz milechem apanim. Not the lechem apanim, and the chavite kohen gadol, and the loaves that come from the kohen gadol that he brings every day, shein bos shtei mesrei. those get broken into 12 chalos, right? That's why lechem apanim is 12, and also the chavite kohen gadol is 12. Maybe it makes sense because they're representative of the shvatim, right? I don't know whether that we saw that anywhere as a source necessarily, but I always presumed that was the explanation why there were 12 loaves or whatever. That these are the offerings that are offered on behalf or representative of Klal Yisrael. 12. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Meir says kulam bos shtei mesrei. Chutz, he says, no, I look at it the other way. All menachos come in groups of 12. Chutz mechalos, that you would smush it once and then punch it twice. Shof shtayim, then you would smush it twice. Uboid sholosh, and then punch it 3 times, and then repeat. So that way you would wind up with a 3-to-5 ratio of the number of kneadings to punches, and therefore that you would wind up with 300 to 500 once you do that 100 times, right?
What did the door ever do you to
do that process 100 times.
What did the door ever do you to deserve such punches?
It was refusing to be smooth. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question. Tuye va tuye chad. When we say we smush it, do we mean when you roll it back and forth, right? You go like this. Is that 1 or is 1 2, right? So this one. Odilma am tuye va tuye is tray. My take, we don't not quite sure on that one. So, okay. Iboilu. I don't know if you can't do too much. Maybe it means that you have to do so just to be machmir. Maybe you'd have to do it. Iboilu. So okay. So now shifa ubeita bachitin. We said that you're going to do the kneading and the punching while it's wheat. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Batzik once it's dough. Iboilu, we asked the question. Rabbi Batzik velo bachitin. When we say Rabbi Yossi says that you do it in the dough, does he mean only the dough, but not the wheat? Or he says you do it twice. You do it with it when it's the wheat and then also with the dough. So Toshma, come and listen to Tanya. We learned in a brisa shifa ubeita bachitin that we're supposed to do the kneading and the punching when it's wheat. And Rabbi Yossi shifa beita babatek. Rabbi Yossi says no when it's dough. Sounds from that brisa a little bit clearer that you're only doing it on the dough, not on the wheat. Whereas because the first opinion says on the wheat, clearly he's arguing when he says no on the dough. Kol menachos bos shtei mesrei. Now, we said all the minchas come as 12, according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to the Tanakama, all of them are 10. So, lechem aponim behedjik sipe. So let's talk about how do you know when there's 10 and when there's 12. So let's start with the lechem aponim. Lechem aponim is clearly written in the Torah, there's 12. V'lakakta solas v'afisos hashtei mesrei chalos. Right? You take the solas and you're going to bake it into 12 loaves, no question. Great, lechem aponim. Chavite kohen gadol, the loaves of the kohen gadol is also 12. That's, everyone agrees that, because osya chuka me lechem aponim. Gzera shava, it says, right, by the lechem aponim, it says kodesh kodeshim hu me'ishet Hashem chok olam. It is a chok olam, and by the kohen gadol it says chok olam laHashem kalil taktar. Both of them use the word chok because the word chok is written by both of them. We know it's gzera shava, 12 loaves. Okay, that far nobody disputes, clear as day. Kol menachos debos eser minola. Now the Tanakama says, so all the other menachos come as 10. How do I know that? Gamar milach metoda. So that the source is the toda offerings. Ma laholan eser afkan eser. The toda gets 10, so too all the rest get 10. V'leilech milachem aponim. So why don't you learn all the rest of the menachos from the lechem aponim? Why do you learn it from the toda? Right? Ma lahalon shtei mesrei, just like the lechem aponim is 12, afkan shtei mesrei, so too the other menachos also should be 12. So the answer is mistaber milach metoda hava leila melech. It makes more sense to learn these other offerings from the lechem of the toda, not from the lechem aponim. Why? Because the other offerings is yachid, they're all individual offerings, and so too is the toda is a personal offering. Hamisnadev, these are donated offerings. Lechem aponim is an obligatory offering. Shemen, there's oil put on these offerings. Lechem aponim, we said, didn't have the oil put onto it at the end when it's in the solas stage. Lechem aponim when it's in the solas says nifsal. If it becomes overnight, right? By the lechem aponim, it's got a whole week. All the other menachos offerings are different. They only have that one day. Shalom b'Shabbos, you don't offer donated offerings on Shabbos ever. And lechem aponim is done on Shabbos. V'shalom b'Tumah. Also, they're individual offerings, so you can't offer them when they are impure, whereas lechem aponim is a community offering, and therefore they can be offered when they're impure. So lechem aponim is completely different. Yeah, but aderabba, I will learn it the other way. I'll learn it from lechem aponim because why? Shekain hektish. All of the other korbanos, the mincha that we're talking about, are all kodesh kadoshim, whereas the toda is kodesh kalim. It's only like a shlamim. It has lesser kedusha. Ulevona. Also, the lechem aponim has levona, as frankincense. The toda does not have any frankincense in it. It's matzah. It's not any chametz. The korban toda has got chametz in it. One of the sets of loaves has chametz. The etzem. All of these mincha offerings are brought by donation, right? Somebody brings a machvas, or they're bringing it by a donation because they're bringing it for itself, whereas the korban toda comes together with a korban shlamim. And so therefore it's not individual, so it's got a lot in common with a lechem aponim. So the answer is, hanach nefishin. The old answer, right? There are more similarities between the korban toda and these individual donated offerings versus the lechem aponim, which has fewer. So therefore, it's going to be more, we're going to consider it more like the korban toda. So the machvas, the marcheshes, these are all going to be brought in loaves of 10 because they are like the korban toda more. Now, v'isvira le davar halama b'gzer shava chozer u'melamed b'binyan av. Now, we had a discussion back in Zvachim, right? What can we learn? This two-step process. Can you learn from one step to the other step when it comes to Kadshim? Remember we had that? Well, once you have something that's learned from a Gzer Shava, we weren't sure whether we can learn a Gzer Shava and then a Binyan Av. So the Gzer Shava is Chok Chok. We're going to go from Lechem Aponim to Chavite Kohen Gadol. Now, can I learn from Chavite Kohen Gadol over to other Menachos as a Binyan Av? Right? Could I do that? So Nelev Mechavite Kohen Gadol. So I would have learned that the mincha offerings, I can bring the other mincha offerings as 12 from the Kohen Gadol. Malahol and Shtei Misrei, Afkan Shtei Misrei. So that could be a reason why Rabbi Yehuda holds that all the other offerings get 12, not 10. Because it overrules the idea that you have more similarities to a toda. Who cares? I've got a Binyan Av. Binyan Av would outweigh it. So that would be better. So Mistabra Mimachme Toda Havalei Lamelech. It makes more sense. So still, it makes more sense to learn it from the korban toda than from the minchas chavitin of the Kohen Gadol, right? Why is that? Because shekain hedyot, because the chavitin Kohen Gadol is a Kohen Gadol's offering, right? Whereas the other offerings in the korban toda is a non-Kohen. Sheis nadev, they're donated offerings. That makes more sense, it's more comparable, whereas the Kohen Gadol's is not a donated offering. Chatzayin, the Kohen Gadol's is only offered half-half. When you bring the korban toda, you bring the other offerings, they're never offered in halves. Lepigol, the Kohen Gadol's doesn't have a pigol, because there's nothing to eat, because the whole thing is burned up. Whereas the korban toda and the other korbanos that are given, there's pigol involved. Shelo b'Shabbos, they're not brought on Shabbos, whereas the Kohen Gadol's is a mandatory offering brought daily. It's even brought on Shabbos. The Shelo b'Tuma, also these other offerings can't be brought b'Tuma, but the Kohen Gadol's, since it's quasi a community offering, it's something that has to be brought. It can be even brought b'Tuma. So therefore, the Kohen Gadol's offering is different. Yeah, but Adrabah, I will look at it the other way. And I will say that Machvite Kohen Gadol, Havalei Lamelech, I should learn it from the Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol. Why? Shekain Isaron. First of all, has the same measurement, the same amount as the Chavitin and the Marchesh, as the Chavitin has the same measurement as the Marcheshes and Machvas. One Isaron. Kli. And by the way, Lachmei Toda has several Isronim. It's not the same. Also, they have to be made in a utensil. You sanctify the utensil. The Korban Toda doesn't become sanctified when you put it in the utensil. The Korban Toda becomes sanctified when you slaughter the animals, the sheep that go with it. Hektish, that these are Kodesh Kodashim. We said the Korban Toda was a Kodesh Kalim. Ulevona, it needs frankincense. Korban Toda did not get frankincense. Matzah, these offerings were only brought as, the Chavitin was also brought as matzah. The Korban Toda was chametz. The etzem, it's brought as itself as a korban, as a mincha, whereas the korban toda was brought together with animals. Hagasha, the minchas and the minchas chavitin have to get touched to the corner of the mizbeach. The korban toda does not get touched to the corner of the mizbeach. The ishim, these are burned. The rest of the menachos have parts of it or all of it burned on the mizbeach, whereas the korban toda is not burned on the mizbeach. It is eaten. V'hani nefisha. Before you're going to answer, okay, which has more? There are more similarities to the Kohen Gadol's offering than there are similarities to the between the Korban Toda and the donated offerings. So the answer is, but Hedjot adifle. The answer is, at the end of the day, there was one comparison that is more significant than all the others. And we've had this before, right? The one that is not a Kohen Gadol is a big difference, right? Can't learn an individual's offering from a Kohen Gadol's offering. A Kohen's offering is different in many ways, inherent differences. So therefore, just because something is the way it works by a Kohen's offering is not by an individual offering. So therefore, we're going to learn from the individual offering. So the individual, just like the Korban Toda is brought in groups of 10, so too the other mincha offerings are brought in groups of 10, not in 12. Now, Rabbi Meir disagrees with that. Rabbi Meir Omer Kulan Bos Shtei Mesrei. Rabbi Meir says, no, we're going to bring them all in groups of 12. My kasavar, why is he holding you can bring it in groups of 12? So there's a couple of reasons why he could hold that. If he holds that, first of all, that you could learn a Gzer Shava and then a Binyanav, so Yolif Mechavite Kohen Gadol Dahanin Nefishin. He might disagree with what we just said. We said there's an inherent difference in that it's a Kohen Gadol's offering, you can't learn from it. He might say, no, learn it from it because it's got many more similarities. So therefore, basically, just like the Kohen Gadol's offering is divided into 12 loaves, all of the other Menachos are also divided into 12 loaves because of the so many similarities between the other Mincha offerings and the Kohen Gadol's offering, rather than from the Toda, which has less similarities. That's possibility number one. And since that was inconclusive when we had learned it before, maybe he holds that you can't learn a Gzer Shava and then over to a binyan av, which means that you couldn't learn the number of loaves from the Kohen Gadol because it would come as a Gzer Shava and then a binyan av. You'd have to learn directly from Yolif Milechem Apanim. You'd have to learn directly from Lechem Apanim. And you'd have to be able to say hektish mehektish odif, like despite the fact that we said you couldn't learn it from the Lechem Apanim before because there were many more similarities between the Korban Toda and the individual offerings than there were between the Lechem Apanim and the individual offerings. We would say the fact that the Korban Toda is Kodshe Kalim is so different that we would say that the other offerings are Kodshe Kodshim, you'd have to learn from them. So therefore, those are 12. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Either he's going to learn from Lechem Apanim or he's going to learn from the Kohen. But here's what we do know. We know the Korban Toda is 10. We know Lechem Apanim and the Kohen Gadol is 12. The question is, what is all the other ones? Whether you learn it from the Toda or whether you learn it from Lechem Apanim or from the Mincha of the Kohen Gadol. Okay, so now, Chutz Melachmei Toda, Rabbi Meir agrees that the Lechem Panim are the Lachmei Toda, the Korban Toda offerings are different. Shem Bos Eser Eser, they come in groups of 10. We took that for granted all this time. So Lachmei Toda, let's talk about that. How do you know there's 10 loaves of the Toda? The answer is Behedyiksiv Behu. It's written right in the pasuk. The pasuk says that the pasuk says that you're supposed to take the amount of dough, the amount of wheat that you're going to bring, and you're going to divide it into chametz, matzah, rikikin, and revuchas. That's chametz bread, matzah, and then you're going to have rikikin wafers that you're going to bake, and revucha and scalded flour. And you're going to make them into 4 groups, and then you're going to take one of them as a truma to Hashem. That's what the pasuk says. You're going to take one of the loaves. Now, truma, how much is truma? So we know in the pasuk, we know in other pasukim that trumas meiser, a Levi, when you give to a Levi, you give meiser to a Levi, a 10th, and then the Levi has to give a 10th trumas meiser to the Kohen. So we know
10th of his 10th.
10th of a 10th. That's correct. So now we know that essentially trumas Hashem means a 10th. If you're supposed to take a 10th of each of the types of loaves and give it, that means you need 10 loaves. You can't take a 10th of a 12th of 12 because we're going to also see that you're not allowed to break the loaves into pieces to donate them, right? You can't take one loaf and then slice a 10th off and give it to Kohen. It has to be a whole loaf as what you give. And so therefore you need 10 loaves, so you can give one full loaf to the Kohen. That's how you know there's going to be 10. Okay, so when we say it's written behedja, it's written clearly in the psukim. It's not quite clearly. It's not like it was by the Lechem Apanim where it said 12. Here it says it's a truma to Hashem, and also it says that you're going to give them as loaves, which means it has to be a whole loaf, and it has to be 1/10. Therefore, there's 10 loaves. Okay, what about Nazirus? How do I know also, he said that we know that there's going to be 10 loaves also by the Korban of the Nazir. That was the one that also says clearly 10. Damar Mar, because Mar said Shlamav. By the Korban, by the Toda, it says his Shlamim. Right, we're going to bring Chametz, and L'Rabos Shamei Nazir, Shlamav is a plural form to tell me that there's another Shlamim offering that comes together with bread, has the same rules as the Korban Toda does. And that is the Shlamim of the Nazir, since it comes together with bread, the rules of the bread are the same. In that, you're going to bring 10 of them. And you divide it into 10 equal parts, even though there's two sets of loaves, you're going to divide it into 20 loaves, because not 40, but each type of loaf gets 20. Amar Rav Tuvi bar Kisna, Amar Shmuel. Rav Tuvi bar Kisna said, name Shmuel, Lachme Toda she'ofan arba chalos yotza. So let's say you take the korban toda, and instead of making it 40, you make it 4 loaves, right? Because there's 4 different types. So I make 1 chametz, 1 matzah, 1 rekikin, and 1 revuchin, 1 scalded. So I've got 4 types. I make just 1 big loaf instead of the 10 loaves of each. What if I just make 1 huge loaf of each? He says I'm yotze, it's fine. V'haba'in and arba'in, but you need to make 40. So the answer is lemitzvah. That's lechatchila. Lechatchila you make 40. Now we have a problem. V'haba'i afrushe truma minayu. How are you going to take 1/10 of the loaf? V'chitema dimafrish mikol chada v'chada. You're going to take a slice, 1/10 from each one. Echad amarachmana v'shlo yitel paros. The pasuk says you're going to take 1 of the loaves and you give it to the kohen. You're not allowed to take a slice. So a slice isn't going to work. So the answer is afrishinu belisha. Maybe he took 1/10 of it out when it was still dough. Right? He took 1/10 out and he baked that one separately and then had 9/10. So then that's how you could be yotze with the whole 1 loaf. Meisvei. So we ask in a brisa. Kol menachos sheriba b'midas chalasan. Right? Let's say, so anytime that, any mincha, that you made the chalos larger, so therefore you wound up with less than 10 loaves, o shemiyet b'midas chalasan, or you made them small, so that you can have more than 10 loaves, ksheros. That's kosher, it's okay. Chutz me lechem apanim, except the lechem apanim, you can't make them more or less than 12. V'chaviti kohen gadol, and the kohen gadol, it says specifically it has to be 12. The lachme toda, and the lachme toda specifically has to be 10, and nazirah specifically has to be 10. Because that seems to be clear psukim. So how do you understand Rav Tuvi bar Kisna if he says that you can get away with 1, seems to be you can't. So the answer is, Hu de Amar ki Haitana, he holds like the following Tana. Detanya ayin vavam beis. Detanya, we learn in a brisa. Kol ha-menachos sheriba b'midas chalasan. All minchos, he holds like this, that you add on extra size of the challah, o shemiyat b'midas chalasan, or you made the challah smaller so you can have more or less loaves. Ksheros, that would work. Chutz mi lechem apanim v'chaviti kohen gadol. Just the ones that you can't do that with is the lechem apanim v'chaviti kohen gadol, which clearly say 12. V'yesh obrim, and there are those who say af lachmei toda naziros, even though lachmei toda and naziros have to be 10. But it's a machlokas, so he holds like the first opinion that allow you to make larger chalos of lesser numbers. Amar Rav Huna says, minchas mafa, when you've got the baked mincha, sha'afa chal achas, if you bake all of them instead of 10 loaves, if you bake them all into 1 loaf, yotza, you're okay, you're yotze. My time, what's the reason? Matzos ksiv. The pasuk says, matzos. Matzos is without a vav, and therefore, even though you're supposed to bake it 10, as we said, or 12 according to Rabbi Meir, right? You're supposed to, nevertheless, without the vav means 1 is okay. Maskif la Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, time out. Time adichsiv matzos. You're telling me because the vav is missing, therefore I can bake it into less? Haksiv matzos. So if it says matzos lo, I can't bake it into less? V'hagabi lachmei toda. What about the lachmei toda themselves? Dichsiv matzos. It says matzos with a vav. Ve'amar Rav Tuvi bar Kisna, Amar Shmuel, and Rav Tuvi bar Kisna said the name of Shmuel. On that, the korban toda itself, lachmei toda shafan arba cholos yotza, that if you bake it into 4, you'd still be yotze. So ahi pliga. So you're right. Rav Tuvi would have to be arguing on that statement without the vav. Right, with the vav, you couldn't be. So therefore, he's arguing on that. Next Mishnah. Mishnah says, Ha-omer ba isar mishalosh se'in. When you have the korban omer, you take 1 isar of flour. You take 3 se'ah of flour to start off with. Shtei halechem. When you're going to make the 2 loaves of bread, shtei esronim mishalosh se'in. You're going to make 2 out of 3 se'ah. So the ratio is less, right? You're going to grind 3 sa'ah down into 2. We're going to see why that is. Lechem apanim, when it comes to the lechem apanim, esrim v'arba esronim may esrim v'arba sa'in. You get 24 isronos, which you need for the lechem apanim. Each loaf is 1 isaron. From 24 sa'in, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So we go to 3-to-1 ratio, to 2-to-1 ratio, to 1-to-1 ratio. My time of the Gemara wants to know why is that? So Keva de mechadosh asi, since the barley is coming, since it's from fresh grain by the Omer, umisa orin asi, it's also coming from barley. So then Isar Mufkar lo asi mishlosin. You have to have 3-to-1 ratio. Barley, you guess, it has more bran to it. Also, it's fresher, it's harder to crush. So therefore, you need to have 3-to-1. Shtei alechem, the 2 loaves of bread by Shavuos, you need shtei esronas mishlosin. It's a 3-to-2 ratio. Why is that? Kevan de mechitin asyan, since it's wheat. So afagav de mechodosh asyan, even though it's still coming from fresh. Shtei esronos asu mishlosin. You can get 2 esronos from 3 sa'ah. And the lechem aponim, esrim v'arba esronos me esrim v'arba sa'in, but the lechem aponim is a 1-to-1 ratio. My time, why is that? Because kevan de mechitin also comes both from wheat, umiyashan also it's coming from old grain, right? Because it's being brought every single week. So isar mufkar asi michsa'ah. You can get a whole isaron out of 1 sa'ah. Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis learned. All menachos that we are adding that have more isrono, that you add the isaron, if you fill up with more of it, o shemiyat b'midas isaron, you have less than it, psulos, that ruins the offering. If it says an isaron, you've got to fill the utensil with an isaron of flour. You can't heap it up over the top, and you can't have too little. Riba b'midas sein shalohen, if you are adding on, right? If you add the number of sa'ah, meaning if the original amount that you're grinding from, or shemiyat shirus. If you add on the sa'ah, the final amount, the isaron is what matters, not how much you start with. If you start with more, you start with less, it doesn't matter. Should we go for it? When they would take the korban ha'omer, they needed 13 sifters. The 2 loaves of bread, they had 12 sifters. Lechem aponim ba'achasrei. The lechem aponim had 11 sifters. Rabbi Shimon Omer lo haya mehan kitzva. Rabbi Shimon says there was no set amount of sifters that you needed. You just needed to get a nice fine product. Elasolos menufa kol tzarka hayamevi. You can get flour that was sifted as much as you needed to. Shinamar v'lakachta solos v'afisosa. You can go to the store and buy pre-sifted flour and bake it. Shetei menufa kol tzarka. It has to be sifted all the way. Tana Rabbanan. Our rabbis learned. Bedaka begasa. The way that they would go is they had the sifters rated from 13 to 1 in order of fineness. They would start off with a very thin sifter that would remove the dust. Then they would sift it again in the bigger sifter that would remove the bran. Then they would go back and remove more dust, and then they would remove more bran until you had a middle product that had all this very small dust pieces gone and all of the big pieces gone as well, and you had a nice fine product. Bedaka begasa. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, no. Shalosh Yisrei Nafos Hayu B'Mikdash, there were 13 of them. Zulam Alamizu, V'Zulam Alamizu. Elyona Koletes Subin, Tachtona Koletes Solas. You went in order of the biggest pieces down to the smallest pieces. And so basically you kept getting rid of the biggest pieces and less until you wound up at the end, and then you finally got rid of the dust at the end, and what you were left with was the proper thing. Rabbi Shimon Omer says, Lo kitzva, there was no set amount. Tana Rabbanan rabbis learned. Soles v'afiso, so the pasuk says you're supposed to take soles. You can buy in the store soles and bake it. Melamed shenikre soles. You can even buy it. It doesn't have to be made in the base. There's a certain number of sifters. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, V'lakachta mikomakom. You can buy it in the store, however much amount you want. Yachol af Menachos. You might think that this is something you can do in any of the korbanos. This is specifically by the lechem aponim you can do that, but not by the other korbanos. So you might think that b'shar menachos came. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, oh, so this is a rule specifically by the lechem aponim that you can go buy it. Why? Mipnei hachisachon, because it could get expensive, because you have to, because you're doing so much flour and you're sifting so much, so therefore if you can go buy it pre-sifted, you can pay for what you're buying. That makes sense. My mipnei hachisachon. What does that mean? Mipnei hachisachon. Amar Rabbi Elazar, haTorah chasa mamon Yisrael. The Torah is worried about your money. The Torah does not want you going out of your way, spending way more than you have to. So therefore, the Beis HaMikdash wants to go purchase for a weekly offering that comes every single week, then it was. Now, if you're going to wind up making this offering once, so then, okay, now make it really fine and make it yourself. So the Omer and the Shtei Lechem, we went and we sifted it ourselves and we made it fine ourselves. But we're willing to buy it pre-sifted. Heicha Ramiza, where does the Torah indicate that? Tichsiv, the pasuk says, V'hishkisa es ha'eda ves be'iram. When Moshe Rabbeinu was told to talk to the rock and get water out of it, then not only did the Bnei Yisrael drink, but also their flocks. Why does Hashem care if you drink saving Bnei Yisrael? He cares about the animals. The answer is Hashem cares about the livestock and the property of the Jewish people as well. Hashem not only provided water for the people, but he provided water for the animals as well. Hadron Allah elu menachos nikmatzos. Hadron Allah elu menachos nikmatzos. Hadron Allah elu menachos nikmatzos. And we will continue with a new parak tomorrow.
Beautiful.